I'm Steve Hecht, founder and editor-at-large of the Impunity Observer. Honored today to have as our featured guest well-known author Jim Simpson, who has recently published his latest book called Manufactured Crisis: The War to End America. Welcome, Jim. Great to see you and appreciate you being here.
Hey, Steve. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I think the place for us to start here is the definition. You in the book, you talk about leftists, communists, progressives. They use all kinds of words, and basically they've demonized everybody. You are a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy theorist. We're really not, but according to them, we are. What is your preferred definition for the people that are executing this strategy that you call a war to end America?
Well, at its heart, the movement is communist. It's communist, it's communism. And the people who are prosecuting it are everything from actual Communist Party members, anarchists, people who call themselves socialists and progressives, and many mainstream Democrats in the United States. It is the entire leftist universe, includes all the woke kids who really have no idea how unwoke they really are. And, as you know, and as anybody who's studied communism for any amount of time knows, that the vast majority of people who promote communism are not even dimly aware that that's what they're doing. They don't recognize it as such. And the communists have done such a masterful job of intimidating and discrediting anyone that tries to point to them as the culprits or even nibble around the edges of being conspiracy theorists, racists, bigots, homophobes, Islamophobes, xenophobes, name your phobe, doesn't really matter. It's all designed to intimidate and silence their critics. As Lenin said back in the 1920s, we must write in a language that inspires hate, revulsion, and scorn towards those who disagree with us, period. We are correct in most of our assessments of them, and that is what they hate because they do not want to be exposed for who they are and what they are doing.
Well, that's exactly why I think your book is so important. In my opinion, every American should read that book, especially policymakers, especially people in institutions. I know the what you're up against with it because I find the same thing. I mean, I have conversations with people and they say, no, 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 this is just normal politics. And they look at Mark Levin on TV and Victor Davis Hanson, who have now come to similar conclusions to what you and I believe. And they say, oh, no, that's too far out. That's not what's happening. And my answer to them is, you are facilitating what they're doing by not recognizing it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Unfortunately, that is the truth. And unfortunately, the communists, since the 1920s, when they actually established a firm base of operations with the foundation of the Soviet Union, they've been studying us like insects on a petri dish. They've been studying what makes us tick, what makes us afraid, all of the various elements of our society so that they can pick it apart and ultimately destroy it. And one thing that they know through the study of human psychology, people are risk averse, first of all. And that's also a fundamental tenet of economics. I had a master's degree in economics. I taught economics at the University of Delaware. I was a White House economist and budget examiner for the Office of Management and Budget. And so I think I can say with some authority that I know what I'm talking about. People are risk averse. That is a basic tenet of economics, and it's a basic tenet of reality. Everybody wants to survive, and that's what makes people risk averse. And so that survival instinct When people are threatened in any way, they tend to try to gravitate into a group to protect and defend themselves. And so when people come under attack, being called racists or bigots, or, oh, you're a hater, or you're just a lunatic, you're a whack job, you're a right wing conspiracy theorist, no matter what it is, they'll look around and they'll worry about what their neighbors think of them. They'll worry about what the society at large think of them. They'll worry about what their employers think, because their employers may want to fire them, even if the employer knows that they're stellar employees who are not in the least bit crazy. But the perception is enough. So people tend to huddle in these groups, and we call them sheep because sheep are easily led. But that's what it amounts to. And the communists know this. So they do everything they can to vilify us, to marginalize us, and pick us off one by one, according to the rules of Radical by Saul Alinsky. Pick the target, polarize it, separate it from the crowd so you can destroy it. And that's what the left has been doing with us since the 1950s, really, and before.
Yeah, that's I certainly agree with that. I mean, I believe that they are expert psychologists, and that most of us have things that bother us, and that if we're mature enough and aware enough, we understand that the problem is within us. In other words, it's not important what somebody thinks of us. It's what's important is what we know about ourselves. And they play on that weakness. And people seem to believe that government can change human nature, can change the creation. And we know that that's impossible.
Yeah. Well, there's another economic tenet for that. It's called rational ignorance. And that's another foundational tenet of economics. And most people are rationally ignorant. They don't want to know. They don't want to know because that means that they're going to have to, if they find out something distressing that's happening, that means that they may have to step out of their comfort zone to actually confront this issue. And that's scary, especially if it's individuals not working as a group. Like in World War II, after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, everybody was unified. Everybody thought it was a great thing to go to war. So it was easy for people to sign up, and they flocked to the to the recruiter to join. But that's because everybody felt under threat, and so they joined together. But how it is today is that people are threatened individually, and there's no really visible, easily identifiable enemy, and methods for attacking that enemy that make it easy for people to say, okay, I'll join. No, everybody says, no, I'm not going to join with you. Are you crazy?
That issue is up front and center today. And would you say, we just talked about Alinsky and his polarization, would you say that Trump derangement syndrome is a result of that Alinsky strategy?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think Trump derangement syndrome is largely something that the left manufactured because, it went from, we don't want this guy elected. They turned it into a narrative. This is a threat to our nation. This is a threat to our democracy. This is a threat. And and that's where the Trump derangement syndrome, none of those, the communists who dreamed up that strategy, they're not deranged at all. They recognize that he is a legitimate threat to their agenda. And in fact, the people who support him are a legitimate threat to his agenda. We had this first time in 2010 after Barack Obama was elected. And then people realized to their horror, oh, what a mistake that was. And in the 2010 election, the state legislatures around the country went from Democrat to Republican at levels not seen since 1928. So there were all these Republican legislatures that took over. And so they don't want to repeat, well, they don't want a repeat of 2016, but they don't want a repeat of 2010 either. And they've been going at it, doing everything they can to try to destroy Trump and to try to destroy his movement and anybody who supports it or endorses it.
Well, that's why they call us deplorables, white supremacists, insurrectionists.
Nazis.
Yeah,
Fascists.
and Nazis, fascists. Well, look, I've talked to people the Jewish people who say Trump is anti-Semitic. Say, really? You mean with three Orthodox Jewish grandchildren, an Orthodox Jewish son-in-law, and his daughter converted?
Right, right.
Makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, no, right. And not to mention the fact that he was able for the first time in history to create the Abraham Accords, which actually brought the Jewish state of Israel and many of the Arab states together. That was unprecedented. And it's astonishing that he never gets credit for that, nor does he get credit for moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem that presidents have been promising to do since 1996, and none of them ever did. So how anybody with any credibility can suggest that he's anti-Semitic is nuts.
Well, it's the same thing with black people. You write about it in the book that this movement, let's call it communist movement, that that it purposely oppresses black people. It keeps them centered in inner cities with ignorant and poor and dependent on the government. And if that's not racist, I'd like to know what is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a strategy that was dreamed up by two communists who were teachers at the Columbia University in the 1960s. And they outlined a program they created that became known as the crisis strategy, or the Cloward-Piven strategy, named after the pair Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven. And the idea was to pack people onto the welfare rolls, not so that people would get relief. They thought welfare, quote, doused the fires of rebellion. So they didn't really want people on welfare, but they wanted to pack people onto welfare so that the welfare system would become overloaded and collapse. And then when it collapsed and they could no longer get their welfare, they were going to riot in the streets and give them their street communist revolution, becoming the cannon fodder for the revolution. And they kept that up. It didn't succeed entirely, although it brought New York City government to the precipice of collapse and bankruptcy in 1975, after they pushed this for a number of years. But so many of what we see today, of the programs that we see carried into mainstream today, are programs that they initially promoted in the 60s and 70s. One was the $15 minimum wage, which now many states have already adopted, a $15 minimum or higher. And as any economist worth his salt will tell you, the minimum wage is very discriminatory. It's very bad for the economy. It destroys jobs, and especially those jobs for people just entering the employment market. And there's nothing good about it. But they wanted $15, $20 minimum wage. The universal basic income, which is now, there are a number of trial pilot programs in counties throughout the United States, and some big counties as well. And that was originally a Cloward and Piven plan when their hoped for collapse came. They were going to suggest as their solution uh, guaranteed annual income for all Americans between what would today be between $40,000 and $80,000 a year. Now, just thinking about that, how ridiculous it is that this was their goal, given that they were trying to collapse the welfare system by overwhelming it with burdens. No burden compares to what it would be if every American was to receive between $40,000 and $80,000 a year for a family of four, without working.
Well, that's part of the, it's why Greece collapsed, right? That's part of the communist strategy. As a matter of fact, Bill Clinton in 1994, he changed the welfare. Not 94, a little after that, he changed the welfare system because he wanted to co-opt the Republicans on it, because he's really not part of this. He's just a corrupt guy that facilitated this thing. But then Obama, and you write this in the book, that Obama reversed it. And this is why. And so another point that you make is also very interesting. If you focus on any one of these things and debate it with these people, you're making a big mistake, because it's all connected. Like you said, the revolution is the issue. The issue is never the issue.
The issue is always the revolution. That's exactly right. And that's any issue you can think of, anything that they promote, whether it's global warming, net zero, immigrant rights, welfare rights, any kind of quote unquote rights, any of the issues, gay rights, transgender rights, whatever it is, that issue is only relevant and important to them in so much as it can, one of the vehicles that they use to insinuate themselves into positions of power, using it as part of their agenda. Most people don't get about this. Is communism, isn't a political ideology. It's not an economic system. Communism is a system of strategies that, if adopted by very ruthless people, can deliver them into absolute power and the absolute wealth that goes with it. These people, I call them entrepreneurial parasites. They are nothing more than greedy, parasitic monsters, really, who use the appealing, if you will. I hate to say that because it doesn't appeal to me at all, but the appealing idea of Marxism, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. Oh, it sounds so equanimous, it sounds so wonderful and so utopian. But really, even Marx would say our real goal is to destroy capitalism. And he wasn't being totally honest, because what his real goal was to get into a position of power and wealth, because he himself was one of the most greedy, selfish people that ever existed. And it turns out all the communists, at least those who seek the real power of communism, have that same agenda in mind.
What you're saying then is that these monsters don't believe in communism, don't care about communism. They use it as a way to entice people to follow them, and they create all this chaos and division as an excuse to consolidate power. And once they consolidate power, that's it. Now you got North Korea, you got Cuba. I have a friend who has researched Cuba, written about Cuba extensively, and he said Fidel Castro wasn't a communist. He didn't believe in communism. He was a businessman.
And one of the most successful businessmen in the world, too. They owned the entire Cuban economy, everything. They owned it all. And they had all the money they want. They lived in a palatial estate, which they called the fisherman's cottage. But don't mistake it. Even communism, as Marx attempted to articulate it, really didn't have any clear methodologies other than the few that he recommended in the Communist Manifesto, all of which were adopted under the FDR administration, by the way. Um, Progressive income tax, uh, welfare, um, uh, Social Security. And, so a lot of people say, well, Social Security is great. No, Social Security is what we've come to live with and come to expect as we reach retirement age. But it really, really was a Trojan horse because if that amount of money, what is now 15% of our income, the income of wage earners anyway, were set aside in the private market, everybody that put that aside would be vastly wealthy. As it is, it's a transfer payment from those who are working to those who are retired, and it's a paltry amount, and it's shrinking, and it's going to have to shrink even more, or the retirement age is going to have to go up, or a bunch of different things, because in the 30s, when it was adopted, there were about 25 people in the labor force for every retiree, which made it easy to fund retirees whose life expectancy was only 2 years after 65. Life expectancy was 67. Now it's 1 in 4 are retired, and life expectancy is about 80. So, and there's unfunded liabilities in Social Security of $130 trillion.
Yeah, so it's going to crash.
Oh, it will absolutely crash.
And the people that want to turn the United States into a one-party dictatorship are perfectly happy to have that happen.
Absolutely.
And whenever anybody brings it up that maybe we should study converting it to a private savings plan, they get they get drummed out of the public discourse, and that's because the public doesn't understand. And another thing I noticed, very interesting, just recently, I'm sure you noticed it, that uh, Trump, I forget where he was talking, that he said something about the enemy within. And all of a sudden, all of the Democrats and their state media are went nuts and say, how could he say this about his fellow American citizens? Well, that presupposes that the Democrats are actually Americans who are trying to do the best they can for the United States. It seems to me that they're enemies of the Constitution, that they want to discard it. They want to end it. So I think that's perfectly reasonable to say that's an enemy within.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They want to, the Constitution to them has been an impediment to them obtaining the power that they want, and they hate it for that reason. They pay lip service sometimes, but I mean, how many times have you heard senators and congressmen of the left of the Democrat Party say, "Yeah, well, the First Amendment shouldn't be unlimited. We need to curb some of this disinformation and misinformation that the Republicans have been peddling." Yeah, no, and so yeah,
And they decide the limits.
yeah, they decide what constitutes information versus disinformation, misinformation, or even malinformation. You can't say bad information if it upsets people.
So we're coming up here, as you said in the introduction of your book, we're coming up on a real tipping point, it seems. And so can we recognize this? Now you have two elements that I see. One is what you and I are talking about, which there probably aren't enough people who are aware of that. And the other is that the Biden regime, Biden-Harris regime, has such an awful record that people just want to change from it. Now, when Trump, if he wins, which I think he will, but we don't know, we have to wait and see. But supposing he wins, of course, he needs help with Congress. He has to have people who have a similar agenda to his have to control Congress, both houses. And if that happens, I see in your book you have a lot of prescriptions about what can be done. Don't you think that we actually have to educate the people on how we got to this point? We can't just look at it as, well, everything's bad, let's fix it. We have to say, hey, this is how we got here.
Yes, absolutely. We have to get the society behind momentum for change. Right now, the momentum for change is all with the left because they've been peddling it for so long. And I mean, it's just a simple example. What happened? What are we calling the people that are coming across the southern border by the tens of thousands now? We calling them not migrants. That's not the word. They're illegal aliens, period. That is the legal term. Now, Secretary Mayorkas of the Department of Homeland Security is trying to get that taken from from the record books. It's law. It's federal law. He can't do that without Congress changing law, but he's trying to do it anyway, and he's vilifying and attacking anyone in his administration, under him, or anywhere else that is using the term illegal alien, which is the correct legal term. They are not migrants. But the left has so relentlessly peddled that term. Now we're all saying, well, the migrants that are coming. No, they're not migrants. They're illegal aliens. They are here and they all need to go back to where they came from or be arrested for any crimes they're committing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have been trying to tell people for the last 3 years and even recently that it's very simple. Democrats, and you write it in the book, illegal immigration, mass migration is part of the communist strategy to conquer societies. And this explains what's happening today in the United States. And the Democrats were always pushing that, and they they abused asylum. So people were coached. I'm fleeing persecution. Okay, you get a hearing. So that was the law. And they couldn't, and Trump couldn't change it. So he made agreements with Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Mexico so that asylum seekers would be processed outside the United States. The first thing that Biden did was he said, oh, we have to give all these asylum people a chance. Well, the vast majority of them don't qualify for asylum, which is fleeing persecution, even fleeing violence. You know, if somebody from Baltimore, if it was fleeing violence, you could ask for asylum in Canada on that basis.
Yeah. And, you and I discussed this before. And as you know, I wrote an article about it where even the violence and economic issues that confront people in Central America, much of that was also manufactured by the American left, led by Barack Hussein Obama. Because as you recall, and as you well know, when they elected, what was the name of the Supreme Court judge whose father was head of one of the guerrilla factions?
Oh, Claudia Pazzi Paz. She was Attorney General.
Claudia Pazzi Paz, whose father headed one of the largest Castro-supported communists,
which assassinated our ambassador in 1968.
Our ambassador and the German ambassador. Her father was that, and when she became Attorney General through a totally illegal process, strong-armed by the United States, she took the remaining guerrilla groups that were still operating up in the far northeast of Guatemala. She renamed them civil rights groups.
Human rights groups.
Human rights groups, and gave them essentially a free pass. And they rapidly spread throughout the countryside, in the meantime, destroying any economic revitalization projects that were going on and telling people who lived there, you can work for us for next to nothing, or you can not work at all.
I can attest to that. I studied that. As a matter of fact, that's when you and I came in contact and got to know each other and become friends.
Yep. No, that's right. Yeah.
And I can tell you that it is much worse now than it was then. As a matter of fact, right now, what's going on is that they're doing the same thing. They perpetrated electoral fraud. They're trafficking children. So you have children coming out of Guatemala because of the conditions that the State Department and this regime, Harris, Biden, whatever it is, regime, have created. They are trafficking children from here into the United States, and they have the data. There are 320,000 missing children, and they have the data that they could use to find those children, and the Harris regime will not release the data.
Lisa, it's mind-boggling that they can get away with all this stuff, but it's actual factual stuff. And I mean, it started under Obama because after he gave the green light for Claudia Paz to take power, which it was really his, administration with the State Department, the head of the ambassador to Guatemala, and those nasty people who facilitated her being appointed to that position, and creating those terrible conditions, which then gave Obama the pretext to say, well, we're going to create a program called DAPA, Deferred Assistance for Children of Immigrants, basically opening the door, telling people to come here. And that began the mass exodus that shot up in 2014 to 2016 to numbers not seen in any time in the past, but then which have again then been dwarfed.
And all on purpose, all part of and this, you bring this out in the book. They want voters, they want voting reapportionment, they want chaos, they want violence, and we should damn well be worried about the terrorism that's going to come from all the terrorists that they have purposely let into the country.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And the funny thing is, the reason they get away with it, which is just like the reason they got away with massive vote fraud in 2020, and I would argue in 2022 as well, is that people can't get their heads around an idea that a political organization that we've known for, all of our lives could be so malevolent, so anti-American, and so blatantly criminal. They can't get their minds around the fact that it could really these people could really be that bad. But let me tell you something. They are that bad. In fact, they're worse.
I agree with you, Jim, completely. And it's so hard because you have to tell people exactly that, and they basically reject it. And all I can say is that I wish for anybody who hears this or anybody else that even hasn't, they should read your book because you outline it in your book. You've done a tremendous amount of research in the book. Where can people find your book, Jim?
Well, they could go to Amazon. I have an author page. Just search under James Simpson. It should come up. But what's easier and also gives you access to the archives of all my writings over the years, going all the way back to like 2005, is my website, crisisnow.net.
Well, yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. And I can tell our listeners here that they can also go to www.impunityobserver.com and they can see the things that I've written. And we've done a whole series of articles about and podcasts and investigations about all the countries almost in Latin America. And everything that you've just said here, Jim, I have written about regarding Guatemala, and it's, as you write in your book, they are helping America's enemies overseas. And Guatemala is a perfect example of how they do that. And they lie about it all the time. It's a tough world. And Jim, I got to say that I'm really happy that you wrote the book, number one. and that you were gracious enough to come on with me and talk about it and talk about these themes on a bigger level. And let's just hope that we can recover our country and fulfill the founder's original vision instead of Barack Obama's dark vision of a one-party dictatorship.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Steve. It's great to be with you.
So thank you very much, Jim, and we'll be in touch.
Yes, sir. Thank you.